The worst mistake of my life wasn't being kidnapped. It was making a man like Dominic Blackwood care whether I ever left. The rain had been falling for hours, drumming against the hospital windows with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that refused to slow down. By the time my shift finally ended, my feet felt like concrete blocks and my back ached from 12 straight hours of lifting patients, changing bandages, and pretending I wasn't completely exhausted. I pushed through the employee entrance of St. Mary's Medical Center and pulled my jacket tighter around myself. The parking lot stretched out beneath rows of pale yellow lights, almost empty except for a handful of cars scattered across the wet asphalt. It was 2:17 in the morning. Most of the city was asleep. I wished I was too. My name is Emily Carter. I'm a nurse, not a doctor, not a hero, just a woman trying to pay rent, survive long shifts, and remember what a full night of sleep feels like. At 29 years old, my biggest concern that night should have been whether there was enough milk left in my refrigerator for coffee in the morning. Instead, I found myself walking through sheets of rain toward my old blue Honda while unknowingly stepping into a nightmare that would change everything. I clicked my key fob. The headlights flashed once. Relief washed over me. Just a few more seconds, and I'd be inside my car with the heater running. That's when I heard tires. A black SUV rolled into the parking lot faster than it should have. Its headlights cut through the rain like searchlights. I frowned. Visitors weren't allowed in employee parking after midnight. The vehicle stopped 3 spaces away from me. The engine remained running. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 2 men stepped out. Both wore dark coats. Both moved with purpose. Something about them made every instinct in my body tighten. I looked away and kept walking. Maybe they were security. Maybe they were looking for someone else. Maybe. That's her, one of them said. I slowed. Her? Before I could turn around, footsteps splashed across the pavement behind me. Excuse me, I called nervously. Can I help you? Neither man answered. One reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph protected inside a plastic sleeve. He glanced from the picture to me and nodded. Confirmed. My stomach dropped. I think you have the wrong person. The taller man smiled politely. It was somehow more unsettling than if he had frowned. Miss Reed, he said. You need to come with us. My name isn't Reed. They exchanged a look. She's nervous, the second man said. That's normal. Rainwater dripped from my hair into my eyes. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Listen carefully, I said. I'm Emily Carter. I'm a nurse. I have no idea who you think I am. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across one man's face. But it vanished almost instantly. We'll sort that out later. My throat tightened. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. I took a step backward. They took one forward. Somewhere beyond the storm, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Please, I whispered. I just want to go home. The taller man opened the SUV's rear door. That won't be possible tonight. Standing there in the rain, staring at the open door and the strangers who seemed absolutely convinced I was someone else, I realized something terrifying. Whatever was happening had started long before I arrived. And somehow, without understanding why, I had just become part of it. I did not remember much about the drive. Just flashes. Rain sliding across tinted windows. Streetlights streaking past in long golden lines. The low hum of the engine. My hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my fingers hurt. Nobody spoke. The 2 men who had taken me from the hospital sat across from me with the calm patience of people who believed everything was under control. I kept thinking about my apartment. About the leftovers in my refrigerator. About the fact that my best friend Jenna would probably start texting me in a few hours when I failed to answer her messages. Ordinary thoughts. Desperate thoughts. The kind you cling to when nothing around you makes sense. Nearly 40 minutes later, the SUV slowed. Massive iron gates emerged from the darkness. They opened without anyone stopping to identify themselves. The vehicle rolled forward along a winding driveway lined with towering trees and carefully trimmed hedges. Then I saw the house. Calling it a house felt ridiculous. It looked more like a private resort hidden in the middle of nowhere. White stone walls. Huge windows glowing warmly against the storm. Expensive cars parked beneath covered structures. Security cameras positioned everywhere. The SUV stopped beneath a covered entrance. One of the men opened my door. This way. My legs felt weak as I stepped onto the pavement. The rain had almost stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. Inside, the mansion was impossibly quiet. Marble floors reflected soft light from chandeliers overhead. Paintings lined the walls. Everything looked expensive enough to belong in a museum. I followed reluctantly through a series of hallways until we entered a large study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered one wall. A fire burned quietly inside a stone fireplace. And standing beside the window was a man. He was taller than I expected. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit. Dark hair neatly combed back. One hand resting inside his pocket while the other held a crystal glass filled with amber liquid. He did not look up immediately. Instead, he stared out at the storm beyond the glass. The room seemed to revolve around him. Not because he was loud. Quite the opposite. Because everyone else became silent when he was present. Finally, he turned. His eyes landed on me. Cold green. Sharp. Observant. The kind of eyes that noticed everything. "This is her?" he asked. The taller man beside me nodded. "Yes, boss." The stranger studied my face. Then he looked down at a folder sitting on his desk. He opened it. His gaze moved between the documents and me several times. A faint crease appeared between his brows. For the first time since arriving, uncertainty entered the room. "What is your name?" he asked. "Emily Carter." Silence. He looked at the folder again. Then back at me. "Occupation?" "Nurse." More silence. The fire crackled softly. The man closed the folder. Slowly. Deliberately. "This is not Dr. Vanessa Reed." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The two men beside me suddenly looked far less confident than they had. In the parking lot. "Boss," the photo matched. Clearly it did not. His voice never rose. Somehow that made it worse. One of the men started speaking. "We believed. You believed incorrectly." Another long silence followed. I stared at him. He stared at me. Finally, I found my voice. "Can I go home now?" His eyes shifted toward me again. Something unreadable flickered behind them. Not anger. Not kindness. Calculation. The kind a person used when solving a complicated problem. "No," he said calmly. My stomach dropped. "What?" "Not yet." I took a step forward. "You admitted they made a mistake." "They did." "Then let me leave." He looked at me for several seconds. "Miss Carter, you have now seen this property. You have seen my people. You have heard conversations that were not intended for you." Fear crawled up my spine. "I do not even know who you are." "My name is Dominic Blackwood." The room fell silent again. Even though I had never met him before, the name seemed to carry weight with everyone around us. Dominic walked around the desk and stopped several feet away. "And for the moment," he said quietly, "you are staying here." Sleep never came. The guest room was larger than my entire apartment, yet I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling while rain tapped softly against the windows. Every few minutes I convinced myself I should try escaping. Every few minutes reality reminded me I had no idea where I was. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones. A woman brought me breakfast shortly after sunrise. Fresh fruit, eggs, coffee that smelled incredible. I barely touched any of it. Around 10 o'clock, the door opened again. One of Dominic Blackwood's men stood outside. "The boss wants you downstairs." My stomach tightened immediately. I followed him through a maze of hallways until voices drifted toward us from somewhere ahead. The moment we entered a large living area, I realized something was wrong. Several men stood gathered around a leather sofa. One of them sat hunched forward with his arm pressed against his side. His face looked pale. Another man was pacing nervously. "Where's the doctor?" somebody asked. "She is 2 hours away," another replied. "Traffic is impossible this morning." I stopped walking. Old instincts took over before fear could. "What happened?" Every head turned toward me. The injured man looked up and laughed weakly. "Look who is here." The wrong nurse. A few of the others chuckled. Heat rose into my face. I had heard jokes about my weight before. Most of my life, actually. High school, college, even hospital coworkers who thought I could not hear them. Usually I ignored it. Usually. But something about being trapped in a stranger's mansion after being kidnapped made my patience disappear. "If you think insults are going to improve your situation, good luck," I said. The room became quiet. The man blinked, then winced as discomfort crossed his face. My attention shifted immediately. Years of nursing had trained me to notice details. His breathing looked shallow. His skin carried the gray tint of someone trying very hard not to show how uncomfortable he felt. "How long has he been sitting like that?" I asked. Nobody answered right away. 3 hours, someone finally admitted. And nobody thought that might be important. The room grew even quieter. I walked forward before I could stop myself. Move. To my surprise, they did. I crouched beside the sofa and focused completely on the patient. Questions came automatically. Symptoms, medical history, recent treatment, medications. The same process I used every day at the hospital. For several minutes, I forgot where I was. Forgot who these men were. Forgot I was supposed to be afraid. Then a strange sensation crawled across the back of my neck. I looked up. Dominic stood in the doorway. I had not heard him arrive. He was watching silently with his arms folded across his chest. Those sharp green eyes missed nothing. Can you help him? He asked. I glanced back at the patient. Yes, but I need supplies. Dominic looked toward one of his men. Get whatever she needs. Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. They moved immediately. I noticed that. More importantly, so did Dominic. For the next half hour, I worked carefully, explaining each step and reassuring the patient whenever anxiety crossed his face. By the time I finished, the tension in the room had eased considerably. Relief spread across several faces. The injured man even managed a small smile. Thank you, Nurse Carter. I stood slowly, tired again, suddenly aware of everyone watching me. Dominic remained near the doorway, silent, observing. Then he said something that surprised every person in the room, including me. Make sure Miss Carter has everything she needs. Nobody laughed at me after that. And for the first time since arriving, I realized the most dangerous man in the mansion was no longer looking at me like a problem. He was looking at me like an answer. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. Nobody locked me in my room. Nobody threatened me. That should have made me feel better. Somehow it did not. Freedom inside a place you could not leave was still a cage. By late afternoon, I found myself standing beside one of the enormous windows overlooking the property. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight spilled across acres of green lawn and tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. It looked peaceful, normal, like the kind of place families visited for summer vacations. Not the headquarters of a man whose name could silence an entire room. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find the same woman who had brought breakfast earlier. Mr. Blackwood would like to see you. My chest tightened immediately. A few minutes later, I entered the study again. Dominic stood behind his desk reviewing paperwork. The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold and amber. For several seconds, he continued reading without acknowledging me. Then he closed the folder and looked up. How is Mason? He asked. It took me a moment to remember the injured man. He is doing much better. Dominic nodded once. Good. Silence followed. I folded my arms. Can I ask you something? You just did. Despite myself, I almost rolled my eyes. Can I ask another question? One corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Not quite a smile. Go ahead. I took a breath. When do I get to leave? The faint hint of amusement vanished instantly. The room seemed colder. Dominic leaned back in his chair. Not yet. Frustration flared through me. You keep saying that. Because it remains true. I am a nurse, not a criminal. I never said otherwise. Then why am I still here? His gaze never left mine. Calm. Controlled. Infuriating. Because circumstances have changed. I stared at him. What does that even mean? Dominic rose from his chair and walked toward the window. The people responsible for the original mistake now know a witness exists. My stomach tightened. You mean me? Yes. And if I go home? He looked out across the property for a long moment before answering. I cannot guarantee your safety. Fear slipped quietly into the room and settled between us. For the first time since arriving, I realized he sounded sincere. Not manipulative. Not threatening. Just honest. That frightened me more than anger would have. I never asked to be involved in any of this, I whispered. Neither did I. The answer surprised me. Dominic turned back toward me. The setting sunlight caught the green in his eyes. For a second, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a man carrying responsibilities he never wanted. The impression disappeared almost immediately. You will remain here temporarily, he said. You will have access to anything you need. Except the front gate. Correct. I let out a long breath. You know, for someone everyone seems terrified of, you are remarkably polite. That earned another brief flicker of amusement. And for someone in your position, you are remarkably fearless. Trust me, I said softly. I am terrified. His eyes held mine for several seconds. Something unreadable passed across his expression. Then a sharp knock sounded outside the study. The door opened before either of us could respond. One of Dominic's men stepped inside. The concern on his face was immediate. "Boss, we have a problem." The atmosphere changed instantly. Dominic straightened. "What happened?" The man hesitated before answering. "Someone has been asking questions about the nurse." The room went silent after those words. Someone has been asking questions about the nurse. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Dominic's expression did not change, but the temperature in the study seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who?" he asked calmly. The man shifted his weight. "We do not know yet. The questions started this morning. Hospital staff, parking lot cameras, employee records." My pulse began hammering inside my chest. They were talking about my life, my job, my coworkers, everything that had seemed normal 48 hours ago. Dominic glanced toward me. Just once. But it was enough. He knew exactly what I was thinking. "Leave us," he told the man. "Continue looking into it." The door closed. Silence returned. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. "This is because of me." "No," Dominic replied. "This is because of the mistake. That mistake is me." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked back toward the desk and rested one hand against its polished surface. "You are a consequence of the mistake." Somehow that sounded even worse. I stared at him. "You really know how to make a woman feel special." To my surprise, a faint smile touched his face. Very brief. Gone almost immediately. "You are still here because I am trying to keep you alive, Miss Carter." The honesty caught me off guard. Before I could respond, another voice echoed from somewhere outside the study. Loud. Frustrated. Familiar. "Where is she?" A moment later, a young man appeared in the doorway. Early 20s. Dark hair. Expensive clothes. He looked irritated and exhausted at the same time. "There you are," he said to Dominic. "Mason is refusing to take his medication." Dominic sighed. Actually sighed. It was the most human thing I had seen him do. "Then make him take it." I tried. The younger man finally noticed me standing there. "Who is this?" "Emily Carter." "The nurse?" "Yes." His eyes widened. "The famous nurse." "I am not famous. You are in this house." He shrugged. "That makes you famous." Before I could answer, he continued. "Maybe she can convince Mason to listen." Dominic looked at me. "You do not have to." I thought about it for all of 3 seconds. "Show me where he is." 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting beside Mason in a sunroom overlooking the gardens. He looked much healthier than yesterday, but still annoyed. The medication sat untouched beside him. "You know," I said, "patients are always telling nurses what to do. And it never works." He laughed despite himself. For the next 20 minutes, we talked about everything except medicine. Baseball, movies, terrible cafeteria food. Eventually, he picked up the medication without another argument. As he swallowed it, I heard applause behind me. I turned. Several of Dominic's men were standing nearby. One of them grinned. "That took her 20 minutes. We have been trying for 6 hours." "You are all terrible negotiators," I said. The men laughed. Actual laughter. The kind that sounded genuine. For the first time since arriving, the mansion felt less like a prison and more like a strange community that operated by rules I did not understand. Then my eyes drifted toward the far end of the room. Dominic stood there watching quietly. He had probably been there for several minutes. Maybe longer. His expression remained unreadable. But when our eyes met, something shifted. Not in him. In me. Because for the first time, I stopped wondering why he would not let me leave. And started wondering what kind of man built a world where everyone feared him, but somehow trusted him too. 3 days passed before I noticed something was wrong with Dominic. Not because he complained. Not because anyone told me. Quite the opposite. Everyone acted as if nothing had changed. Breakfast meetings continued. Calls came and went. Expensive cars arrived through the gates. Men in suits filled hallways carrying folders and speaking in low voices. The entire mansion moved around Dominic Blackwood the way planets orbit a sun. Yet every now and then I caught small details. A brief tightening of his jaw. A slight hesitation when he stood from his chair. The way one hand occasionally pressed against his side when he thought nobody was watching. Most people would have missed it. Nurses do not. Late one evening, I wandered into the library looking for something to read. The mansion was unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows again. It seemed to rain every time my life became more complicated. I rounded a bookshelf and froze. Dominic sat alone in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. A file rested open on the table beside him. His suit jacket had been removed. His white dress shirt was rolled to the elbows. For a moment, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a tired man carrying the weight of an entire world. Then I noticed the faint discoloration spreading beneath the fabric near his ribs. My nursing instincts immediately woke up. How long has that been bothering you? His head lifted. Those sharp green eyes landed on me. Good evening, Emily. That was not an answer. He glanced down briefly. I am fine. I folded my arms. Every patient who says that is lying. To my surprise, he laughed quietly. The sound caught me completely off guard. You seem very confident. I have worked 12-hour shifts for almost a decade. Confidence is all that stands between nurses and complete chaos. Dominic shook his head slightly. It is nothing serious. Then let me check. The warmth vanished from his expression instantly, a wall sliding back into place. No, Dominic. No, I stepped closer. You trust me to help your people. That is different. Why? His eyes held mine. Because if something happens to them, they complain. If something happens to me, everyone else panics. The answer was so unexpected that I almost smiled. That is the worst medical logic I have ever heard. Silence stretched between us. Rain whispered against the glass. Firelight flickered across the room. Finally, I sighed. You know what I think? I am beginning to suspect you will tell me. I think you are terrified of being treated like a normal person. Dominic stared at me, completely still. The fire cracked softly behind him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then something changed in his expression. Not anger, not annoyance. Something quieter, more vulnerable, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. You should get some sleep, Emily. I looked at him for another moment before turning toward the door. Halfway there, his voice stopped me. Thank you. I glanced back. For what? He looked down at the file on the table. For speaking to me like everyone else does not. As I left the library, my heart felt strangely heavy. Because for the first time, since arriving, I realized the strongest man in the mansion might also be the loneliest. The next morning began with an uneasy feeling I could not explain. The mansion looked the same. The staff moved through their routines. Coffee brewed somewhere downstairs. Sunlight poured through the tall windows. Yet something felt different. Tension hung in the air like humidity before a storm. I noticed it first at breakfast. Conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. Phones appeared more often. Security personnel moved through hallways with greater urgency. Nobody told me anything. They did not have to. After spending a week around Dominic's world, I had learned to recognize when trouble was approaching. Around noon, I found Mason sitting outside near the gardens. He was reading a sports magazine and pretending not to enjoy the fresh air. You look worried, he said without looking up. You look nosy. That too. I sat beside him. Do you know what is going on? Mason hesitated. For the first time since I had met him, his usual humor faded. People are asking questions again. My stomach tightened immediately. About me? He nodded. About you. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. A breeze stirred the trees overhead. Somewhere in the distance, birds called to one another. The peaceful setting made the conversation feel even more unsettling. I do not understand, I whispered. I am just a nurse. Mason closed the magazine. That is exactly why everybody is confused. Before I could ask what he meant, a black SUV rolled across the driveway and stopped near the entrance. Several men stepped out. Their expressions were serious, focused. I watched them disappear into the mansion. An hour later, I was walking through the second-floor hallway when raised voices drifted from behind a closed office door. I was not trying to eavesdrop. I was simply passing by. Then I heard my name. Emily. My feet stopped automatically. We can move her somewhere else, one man was saying. That solves nothing, another replied. Dominic's voice cut through both of them. Calm. Controlled. No. It follows her wherever she goes. Silence followed. Then another voice spoke. The message was clear. My heartbeat accelerated. Message? What message? I stepped away before anyone could notice me. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Questions piled higher and higher inside my head. Nobody offered answers. By evening, the sky had darkened beneath heavy clouds. Rain began falling shortly after sunset. I found myself standing beside the library window watching water race down the glass when the door opened behind me. Dominic entered. One look at his face told me everything. Something had happened. What is going on? I asked immediately. He remained silent for a moment. Then he handed me a folded sheet of paper. My hands shook as I opened it. There were only a few typed words. No signature. No explanation. Just a single sentence. Give us the nurse, or everything burns with her. I stared at the page. My blood turned cold. Slowly I looked up. Dominic's jaw tightened. His eyes never left mine. You wanted to know why I would not let you leave, he said quietly. Now you know. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the message again. Give us the nurse, or everything burns with her. The words replayed endlessly inside my head. By sunrise, exhaustion had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Yet what frightened me most was not the threat itself. It was Dominic's reaction to it. He had not looked angry. He had not looked afraid. He had looked determined. The next few days passed under a strange cloud of tension. Security around the property quietly increased. More vehicles arrived through the gates. More meetings took place behind closed doors. Whenever I asked questions, nobody gave direct answers. Not even Mason. Especially not Dominic. One afternoon, I found him standing alone on a covered terrace overlooking the lake behind the mansion. Gray clouds drifted across the sky. Wind rippled the water below. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. You should let me leave, I finally said. Dominic kept his eyes on the horizon. No, this situation exists because of me. No, then because of the mistake. His jaw tightened slightly. Perhaps. I stepped closer. People are being threatened because I am here. People were being threatened long before you arrived. The answer silenced me. Dominic finally looked at me. Emily, listen carefully. His voice was calm. Steady. None of this is your fault. I wanted to argue. Instead, I found myself studying the exhaustion hidden behind his eyes. The sleepless nights. The pressure. The responsibility. For the first time, I understood how much he had been carrying. Later that evening, a storm rolled across the property. Thunder echoed through the hills. Rain hammered the windows. I was reading in the library when the lights flickered briefly. Moments later, hurried footsteps sounded in the hallway. The atmosphere changed immediately. Voices filled nearby rooms. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Something was happening. Before I could leave the library, Dominic appeared. Water glistened across the shoulders of his dark coat. He looked like he had been outside in the storm. You need to stay here, he said. My heart immediately accelerated. Why? Because I asked you to. That is not an answer. For a brief moment, frustration flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. Certain people made a move tonight. My stomach dropped. Because of me? He looked away. Silence answered the question. Fear rushed through me. Real fear. Not for myself. For everyone around me. For Mason. For the staff. For Dominic. You can end this, I whispered. His eyes snapped back to mine. Do not say it. If I leave. No. The word came so fast it startled me. Dominic. No. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Rain battered the windows. Thunder rolled overhead. Then he stepped closer than he ever had before. Not threatening. Not controlling. Just completely honest. Do you know what everyone keeps asking me? He said quietly. I shook my head. They ask why I am risking so much for one person. His gaze never left mine. And for the first time in my life, I do not have an answer that makes sense. My breath caught. The storm continued raging outside. But inside the library, everything seemed to stand still. Because in that moment, I realized something neither of us could ignore anymore. Somewhere between the mistake, the mansion, the endless arguments, and the quiet conversations, I had stopped being a responsibility. And Dominic Blackwood had stopped seeing me as someone he needed to protect. He was protecting me because he could not imagine losing me. 2 weeks later, the storm was gone. The tension that had gripped the mansion for days had finally begun to fade. Life settled into something almost normal. Almost. I spent my mornings helping wherever I could, my afternoons arguing with Mason about baseball statistics, and my evenings pretending that Dominic Blackwood did not occupy far more of my thoughts than he should. Yet beneath the calm, one truth remained. My life outside these gates was waiting for me. One bright Saturday morning, Dominic knocked on the open door of the library. Get your things. I looked up from my book. Why? His expression remained unreadable. Because you are going home. For a moment, I simply stared at him. I had imagined this conversation 100 times. Dreamed about it. Argued for it. And now that it was finally happening, I felt strangely hollow. That is it. I asked quietly. That is it. An hour later, my small suitcase sat beside me in the back of a black SUV. Dominic drove himself. Neither of us spoke much during the trip. The city gradually returned around us. Familiar streets. Familiar traffic. familiar buildings. The life I had thought I would never see again. When we finally pulled into the parking lot outside my apartment building, my heart squeezed painfully. Everything looked exactly the same, yet I felt completely different. Dominic stepped out and carried my suitcase to the sidewalk before I could protest. The gesture was simple. Somehow it meant everything. We stood there in silence. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere across the street. Ordinary life continued around us. "So this is goodbye," I said. Dominic looked at the apartment building, then at me. "If that is what you want." The answer caught me off guard. What if I do not know what I want? For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. The same man who could command an entire room looked completely unprepared for that question. I laughed softly. That might be the first honest thing either of us has said. A faint smile appeared. Small, real, dangerous to my heart. I reached for the suitcase handle. My fingers brushed against it, then stopped, because neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Finally, Dominic spoke. "I spent weeks convincing myself that keeping you at the mansion was about protecting you." My pulse quickened, and he exhaled slowly. And somewhere along the way, that stopped being the truth. The world seemed to quiet around us. "Dominic," he shook his head gently. "I kidnapped the wrong nurse." I felt a laugh escape despite the tears suddenly threatening my eyes. That is probably the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. His smile widened. Just slightly. Perhaps. Then his expression softened. "But letting you walk away might be the first mistake I cannot survive." My heart completely surrendered at that moment. Not because he was powerful. Not because he was feared. Not because he owned half the city. Because beneath all of that was a lonely man who had finally allowed himself to care. I stepped closer. Close enough to see the relief hidden behind his eyes. Close enough to realize I was smiling too. "Good," I whispered. "Because I am not sure I want to walk away either." Years from now, people would ask how a nurse and a man like Dominic Blackwood ever found each other. The truth was simple. A mistake brought us together. Compassion kept us there. And sometimes the life you are meant to have begins with the wrong door, the wrong turn, or the wrong person at exactly the right moment.